Basically, TPRS is another method of language teaching, and it's kind of backwards, if you think of it. It's backwards to what we've always been taught about how we should teach languages and how we should study and learn languages, in that it tries to model the way a very young child learns language. So in a TPRS classroom, we do use English, we do tell them what things mean, but we basically say things very, very slowly and we repeat a lot, but hopefully not in a predictable way. We're trying to be engaging and interesting as we hammer away at these basic words over and over. Sometimes we might tell a story, sometimes we might just be asking questions of the kids, but as long as the language is being used, it's a language-rich environment and they understand everything, because in TPRS, comprehensible means 100% comprehensible, not mostly or kind of or sort of. Then they're going to acquire the language. One of the techniques we use in TPRS is called circling. And all circling is a way of asking questions in, you start out by asking in a pattern, but later we ask them seemingly randomly, but we actually have kind of a plan underneath it. The idea is that you take a certain sentence, like Cindy buys a car, for example, and I ask all the questions I can think about that are answerable by that statement. So if I ask, does Cindy buy a car? That's a good circling question because we know the answer, Cindy buys a car. If I ask, does Ronald Reagan buy a car? We can answer that because the answer is no, Cindy buys a car, not Ronald Reagan. How ridiculous is that? And we go ahead and ask all those questions about the subject, the person doing the action, about the verb, is Cindy buying a car or is Cindy nibbling on the fenders of a car? You know, is Cindy buying a car or is Cindy buying a large blue duck? And then we just ask all of these questions. It comes out to be in Chinese 18 different questions that we can ask for a single sentence. Now in a real class we might not ask all 18 of them, it gets a bit boring after a while. But we're going to ask for 5 of them and maybe do a comprehension check in between where I'm saying, what did I just say? Translate into English, real quick. Obama 吃不吃 go. 不吃 what was I asking? 吃不吃 does, oops. Yeah, does he eat go? Dogs. 不吃 right, 不吃 doesn't eat. 不吃. Or I might do what we call pop-ups, which is just a very, very short 30-second, or usually much less than 30 seconds, little window into grammar or phonology or some technical aspect of the language. We do it without all the jargon. We just will say something like, you hear that word 喜欢, that sh sound? Is that the happy sh sound or the sad sh sound? Oh, it's the happy one, so how do you spell it? X, that's right, and we just go on. So over the course of the year, doing those pop-ups 30, 40, 50, 100 times, the students acquire the fact that, you know, the whatever technically that is in linguistic terms, that sound is spelled with an X as opposed to the retroflex SH sound, which is spelled with SH in Chinese. And we do that with all kinds of things, with grammar, with phonology, with cultural things even sometimes. We make the curriculum first, actually. So in a camp like this one, it might look pretty random because it's a very short period of time. So there's not the demand to get through 50 or 100 items, so we're a little bit more relaxed. But if it were a full year course, for example, I would sit down beforehand, and if there isn't a curriculum existing, I would take that curriculum and tease out the grammar items, the points of grammar that the district would like covered in a year. And I would also make a list of all the vocabulary items they would like covered. And basically, I put the vocabulary into the grammar to come up with a short phrase. With a beginner, first day of Chinese, it's not really a phrase, it's just one word. I might teach chu, go. Chu, chu means goes, yeah. The gesture I use is chu, chu, because when you sneeze, people go, right? Chu, and it's enough. I can say, he goes Walmart, and that's already a sentence in Chinese, and so the beginners learn that, and they're also learning that that's the right sentence order and a lot of other things. But with more advanced students, we would be doing verbs and objects. In Chinese, we have the verb, object, verb, duration pattern to show durational time, and we would be working that. We work past tense. We use the ba construction, which is an object marker, a preposed object marker in Chinese. All those patterns get used very naturally. In fact, in our beginner class this morning, we actually used ba, and nobody cared at all. We were talking about buying a birthday present for Lord Voldemort. Bob was buying one. And we had to figure out where Voldemort was. How was Bob going to give it to him? And we said, how does Bob give the present to Voldemort? Bob 怎么样把礼物给 Voldemort? We didn't explain what ba was. We didn't give a 20-minute lesson on it first. We just used it. I said, what does it mean? They translated the question correctly. We went on. And so across the course of the year, with many different ba events going on, they would get that eventually. So for curriculum, if there is a curriculum, we start that way. What if there's not? Two choices. If you're teaching a textbook, like if you're in a district where they've adopted a certain text and they want you to use that text, generally what I would do would be to take all of the vocabulary and put it on an Excel spreadsheet, and then take another column and put random numbers in it. Seed it with random numbers, and then sort on the random numbers so the vocabulary gets all mixed up really thoroughly. And then I would start picking items to put together into phrases like that. I'm always going to sort of front load the kids with the most common high frequency words in Chinese, like go and want and buy and things that they can use in every story. But after that, I'm basically just covering the content of that book, which is what the district wanted me to do, but doing it in smaller chunks and using stories. Now, if I'm totally free, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing for a TPRS teacher, I would start from frequency. I would just say, what are the most frequent words in this language? And it's the common everyday human things like eating and walking, going places, wanting things, feelings, just the kinds of things that you're teaching in the camp anyway. And I would take those words and just put them together with appropriate other words that go with them. Eat, well, we got to eat something. Maybe we eat pizza at first because it's easier in Chinese. Next week we'll be eating baozi, which is a word we really want them to learn in Chinese. And just start working those words and working them, telling stories. Or even not stories, sometimes just talking about the kids. Ah, 是你? Oh, okay. 我知道了, I know. Oh, 好, 好. I'm going to start class usually by writing my item on the board. So this morning, for example, I was teaching 挑选礼物, select a gift. That was our item. So I wrote 挑选礼物 on the board, and I underlined 挑选, and I wrote select or choose, and I circled 礼物, and I wrote choose, so they would know which was which. I mean gift, rather. So they'd know. And then I just started saying, you know, I knew that they'd gone to Ala Moana Center on Sunday with our field trip. I said, did anyone choose a gift on Sunday? And sure enough, we had someone who had. And okay, Henry, you chose a gift on Sunday. Really? Class, Henry chose a gift on Sunday. Now the rule in TPRS is, whatever I say as the teacher is fascinating. So they're required to either go, ooh, or ah, or sometimes aw, if it's sad. 对不对? 谢谢. 对. But whatever kind of reaction would be appropriate. And that's not just to feed my ego, although it does. It's also, it really gets the class to cooperate. It gets them to buy into the reality of these stories, whatever's going on. We started today with a realistic story. Henry went to Ala Moana Center. He bought a present for his cousin. And he bought an Etch-a-Sketch, as it turned out. Something like that, I don't know. Anyway, so we circled that for a while. Did Henry go here or there to buy his to select his present? Where did he select a present? Why did he select that present? Who did he select a present for? So we're using the word over and over. And in different grammar patterns, not always just the same one. And then I'm thinking, well, I don't want to tell a story about this particular boy in the class because we can't go much farther. You know, we pretty much know what's going on. So I said, oh, well, Henry selected a present in Ala Moana this Sunday. You know, who else selected a present this Sunday? And of course, with the Harry Potter craze, recently somebody said Voldemort. That's right. Oh, it was Bob. Bob selected a present. For whom? For Voldemort. And then we were off because it caught their imagination. 挑选了 Etch-a-Sketch. Okay? Bob 挑选了 Etch-a-Sketch. 他去哪儿? 去 Mars, 对 Mars 在哪儿? 在这儿 ，OK？ Mars 在那儿。哎 ，Bob 怎么去 Mars？ 骑了 飞的 moose 啊 ，hold on， 飞的 moose。你是飞的 moose， 对。Their classmate Henry is a good thing to talk about. And there are teachers who can talk only about kids in the class. I'm not good at that. It's not my style. But there are many really, really good TPRS teachers who just talk about the kids and they're excellent at it. I like the fantasy stuff. So we got talking about, okay, Bob, I don't know who Bob is, but he was some guy who was buying a present for Voldemort. Okay, what do you buy for the Lord of Evil who has everything? So we started talking about what present did they select for Voldemort, where did he select this present, you know, how did he get to the place where he selected the present, and a lot of language is going on. And the kids were into it because they had this picture of some, you know, inoffensive guy named Bob who's charged with picking out a birthday present for the Lord of Death, whose birthday, by the way, is July 40th, we decided. I think basically what we do is keep a lot of very small balls in the air at the same time. It's like juggling ping pong balls, in a way. You're always going to be circling. But when you're circling, asking those repetitive questions, you're also thinking, do I need to circle this sentence? If I'm teaching absolute beginners, I have to circle everything. Everything's new to them. But if I'm teaching more advanced students, they already know that basic language. And if I circle it, they're going to get restless. It's too easy for them. So that's one thing we're considering. Is the level appropriate? I'm teaching to the eyes. So my main job as a TPRS teacher is to look into their eyes as I'm teaching and try to judge whether they understand what I'm saying. That's going to tell me, am I going too fast? And you can hear in English, I speak very fast, just as a normal thing. So I need to speak very slowly in TPRS when I'm teaching early stages. Looking in their eyes tells me, am I going too fast? Am I using words that are out of bounds, what we call, that have not been introduced within that class, or that I know for sure they know? If that's the case, I got to throw another ball up in the air and run up and write that word on the board with its English to make it understandable to them. The extra words that get put in is another ball in the air. Those are put in to differentiate, because I'm going to have a class with slower learners and faster learners, for lack of a better word. My faster learners are going to get bored if I just say the same word over and over. I need to throw them some interesting details in Chinese that they're quick to pick up and they think are cool. So I'm trying to think what came up today. All sorts of questions. We might say, you know, did Bob use a credit card when he bought Voldemort's present? You know, schwaka. That's not something I'm requiring the class to know. I've written it up on the board. The translation was there. We used it once or twice, no big deal. And we went on. The slower processors are not going to hold on to that. They might remember we talked about credit cards, but they're not going to grab that word. My quicker processors might, and many of them do. And they'll come back the next day and they'll say, oh, they'll use that word, tashwakala, something like that. So that's one of the ways we differentiate as well. So differentiation is another ball I've got in the air. I mean, of course, we have the usual classroom management stuff that every teacher has, no matter what method you're teaching or what subject you're teaching. So I'm watching out for whose grandmother just died according to the guidance office email, and I need to watch out for that kid, maybe make him a hero in the story today to kind of give him something, you know, whatever needs to be done. I'm thinking about curriculum in general. You know, of course, I've made my lesson plan for the day, but I'm kind of looking at the whole year. Where are we moving along on this curriculum curve, and how are we going to get to the end in time? What's our pacing like? And finally, I'm worrying about leaving enough time at the end to give the quiz. That's my personal challenge every day. Because we get into these stories so much, oh, it's time to go. But ideally, the TPRS teacher would want to leave 4 or 5 minutes at the end and just pass out something really simple, maybe a quarter sheet of paper and a little golf pencil you can get on eBay, real quick, and then just give a really simple true and false or one-word vocabulary quiz type thing. So if we told a story about Bob buying the present for Voldemort, I might say true or false, in Chinese, of course. You know, Bob bought a present for his cousin. So I'm mixing that early language that I had talking about a boy in the class who really did buy a present for his cousin with the later part about in the story. I'm really just testing two things. Number one, were they listening? Anyone who was listening, because it was all explained, it was translated, there was no chance they couldn't understand, would be able to get that question right. And number two, do they understand the language that's being used in that statement? If they don't, even if they were listening, they couldn't get it right. So I'm looking at those two things. It keeps them accountable. 礼物。
礼物。
挑选一个礼物。
Gift.
对，很好，很好。挑选。
Pick a gift.
Yeah,
Pick
挑选。
up
Yep.
something.
给。
Give to.
As far as assessment on a larger scale, I would be doing periodic vocabulary quizzes, for one thing. We did what we call, or what I call, a brain dump yesterday, where we had the kids draw a little storyboard, very simple, 6-scene cartoon thing with no words. Don't use notes or references. This is just what's in your brain. I just want a snapshot of what's inside your brain. Trust me, this is a lot easier than opening up your face and taking a picture. And then they had to come up to me and tell me the story in Chinese. They could refer to their pictures for guidance.
有一个男生叫 Billy，
Billy.
他有一个牛，那个牛非常喜欢吃草。
哦，这是牛哈。
Yeah， 我不会画图。
没有，很好，很好。And that gives me a lot of information about what language they can actually use. All TPRS quizzes in districts where we can get away with it, because some districts won't permit it, but ideally they're all unannounced. I mean, the final is unannounced for that matter, although you can usually guess when the final exam is. But the idea is that we're not warning them to go home and study and memorize and come back and tell me what you can memorize. I want to know what's in your brain today, at this particular time. And unannounced quizzes and tests give me a chance to do that. Now, the other leg of TPRS, besides the storytelling, which was one side of it that I did here this camp, is the reading end of it. And in a general TPRS class, you might do storytelling one day, or conversation, whatever you want to call it, and the next day you would read something that was very similar to that story. So they're using the same language and the same structures, but we're doing it in a visual modality this time. And when we read, we're going to read out loud together. I'm going to read the Chinese because hopefully my Chinese is the best in the class. We hope so. So they can hear it correctly. I don't want them to hear their peers struggling through something that they're not fluently able to speak yet. But then I'm going to ask them questions. We're going to do compare and contrast. We're going to do information questions. We'll compare the girl in the story on paper to a girl in the class. You know, the girl in the story bought a horse. Did any of you buy a horse last weekend? Oh, really? You bought a giraffe? That's interesting. That's if they're crazy kids. Or you bought a purse or a pair of shoes or whatever it is they bought. So it gives us another opportunity to bring more vocabulary in and also to reinforce those words. And I'm a real believer in reading in pinyin, in that pinyin reading is like listening comprehension with somebody who's really cooperative. If you're listening to someone speak, you can't really slow them down or speed them up or rewind them very effectively. But pinyin readings, it's the sound captured on paper for you. So you can take it in at your own rate and track back if you need to or whatever to make sure that what you're reading makes sense. And we're seeing a lot of that in the character reading class, which is really exciting to see them looking at characters and saying something and stopping and saying, wait, that doesn't make sense in Chinese, and going back and fixing the word. So reading, input, differentiation, keeping it comprehensible, keeping it in bounds, not using words they don't know, and just the usual, classroom management, fire drills, band trips, all the usual stuff that we do as teachers is basically what we do. I'm hoping, on my side, for nothing more than to get those items that we're concentrating on that day out there at least 70 times in unexpected ways. So this time, if I'm teaching the word present, for example, or buy a present, does Bob buy a present, Does the man who buys a present go to Sears or whatever? Those are still buy a present, but they're in different structures. They're in different contexts. So I'm hoping, on my part, just to repeat enough. TPRS is a trick. It's only a trick. It's sugarcoating. It's a way to get young people who are wiggly and full of hormones and whatever to sit still long enough to listen to a whole bunch of input in a language. if I teach this method to an adult learner, which I do on Skype sometimes, I don't have to worry so much about personalizing my content. My adult learner doesn't care if I talk about how many pencils are on the table. They're going to think that's fascinating because they care, they want to learn. But not every teenager has Chinese as their first priority. I mean, maybe little Mary had a fight with her mother this morning, she's upset because her dog is sick, she didn't do well in her math class, and she saw her boyfriend walking around the corner with a cheerleader. She's upset. She's not worrying about Chinese. So our trick is to get her into an environment where she's comfortable and get her included in something that takes her away from the problems of life. And in TPRS class, everyone in our class is bigger, better, stronger, more beautiful, and anything than anyone outside the class, which are the celebrities and the Brad Pitts of the world and so forth. So it's just a little bit of an ego boost, and we all know it's silly. We know it's silly, but we buy into it because it's a comfortable place to be. So all we're doing really with TPRS as a teacher is tricking these young people to sit still long enough to listen. May, yo. May, it's rising and then low. May, yo. Hear how my voice does the same thing? May, yo. From the student's perspective, I guess what they would want really is to be producing meaningful language. Students, in my experience with the TPRS, like it because they're able to take this language and use it immediately. We have them speaking Chinese on the playground, in the lunch line, making nuisances of themselves, really, with the parents who don't speak it, because they can. Because they take the pattern, Bob wants to buy a present, and they apply it immediately to little George wants to buy a slice of pizza, or whatever is going on in their lives. So by the combination of high frequency words and also what I call high importance words, words that are important to this group of students. For example, if I were teaching in Hawaii, I would probably teach surfing as a word because it's important to people in Hawaii. Living where I do in New York, not so much. I would be teaching tobogganing before surfing, unfortunately. But to that particular group of kids, whatever's important to their lives, I want to facilitate them being able to share themselves and their culture and their lives with people so that when they go on Skype and they go in these exchanges or they do pen pal projects or whatever, they can hold their own with the Chinese counterparts. And that's where we start getting the communities and the culture and everything like that coming in more strongly. A colleague of mine up in New York who teaches French runs the most well-organized TPRS classroom, or any classroom I've ever seen. His kids look like they have been brainwashed somehow. They're all sitting up straight. There's not a sound in the room. They're all paying attention. They're all answering appropriately. He's a very laid-back person. He doesn't act. He doesn't make funny voices. He doesn't wave props around. He doesn't do any of the things that a lot of people associate with TPRS. A lot of people will say, oh, it's too tiring to do TPRS. The teacher has to be putting a show on. He doesn't do any of that. He just stands there and speaks French. And it all happens around him. Now, I'm naturally more outgoing, I guess, when I'm around younger people, at least. So my classes tend to be a little more boisterous. I'm being a little more dramatic, maybe, in the language than the next teacher might be. But there are all kinds of people. And again, you don't even have to have a story. You could have a teacher who's simply talking to the kids the whole period. As long as you're talking, keeping them engaged, interested, and you're using whatever language it is you're teaching, they're going to acquire. Now, teacher driving the boat, you also have to be thinking in the back of your mind, curriculum, am I covering it? Am I getting to everything? But you can do that. If you have a basic blueprint, you can gently guide the conversation even where you want it to go. So it might look like a talk show sometimes. It might look like a circus. Or anything in between. And of course, the younger the kids are, the more there are going to be these concrete, manipulable puppets and stuffed animals and things like that, especially with kids under 10 or 11. It's going to be a lot simpler language. It's going to be every child has to have a turn, because there's a riot, of course, if they don't. And they have to see that duck or that goat or whatever it is before they can learn the word. They're not as good at this abstract stuff as the older ones are. So there's no answer to what does it look like, I guess. I started TPRS in 2000. And I was teaching Spanish at the time at an urban school district, so it was a bit of a rough crowd. And I taught through to Thanksgiving. Now, I wasn't a new teacher. I'd been teaching for 10 years in various places in Asia and in the US. This was a tough crowd, and it just wasn't working. And we were teaching a horrible, horrible Spanish textbook, which shall remain nameless. But it was clear that the kids were bored, they were acting out, they were not mastering the material, the grades were so-so, the comprehension was worse. So I started Googling, and that was when I first came upon TPRS as a method. And it was different back then. It wasn't at all what it is now. But I went online and I ordered the book. Now, Blaine Ray had a book out. He's the creator of TPRS. Teaching Fluency Through TPRS Storytelling. I ordered the book and I ordered the video, and I went home the Thursday of Thanksgiving break, and I put it in my VCR. And I watched it once, and I watched it again, and I watched it 3 times, and I read the book cover to cover. And Monday morning, God bless me, I went in and tried it. And I've never taught any other way since. However, was that good TPRS that Monday? Oh no, I'm sure it wasn't. But I did manage to get to a workshop with Blaine Ray not too long after that, and got some actual training and better ideas of how to make this work. You can get a good idea from the book, but there's nothing like going to a workshop and being coached and having people help you out. We have also a very active Yahoo Groups list, which is called More TPRS at the Yahoo Groups site. And it's really a great resource because it's truly, no question, too easy. All the big name presenters come on there. Susie Gross is on there all the time. Blaine Ray is on there. Lots of people in lots of languages with years and years of experience doing this are on there every day and answering all kinds of questions. So it's a really good resource for anyone who wants to learn more, or if you're trying to do it and something's not working and you're like, darn it, I keep trying to do this and yet I come up against this brick wall. Can somebody maybe tell me what's going wrong? And you'd be surprised, a lot of times they can figure it out because it's happened to all of us. I mean, kids are kids. They're not that different. So we all make the same mistakes as teachers and we all face the same challenges as kids.
The end.